He frowned and put his hand to his chest. You mean, am I inhabiting a human body? No, I can inhabit any graveyard, any place of death or mourning. This is my natural appearance. Oh, part of me had hoped there was an actual boy sitting next to me, someone who had just happened to be hosting a god. But I should have known that was too good to be true. I felt disappointed. Then I felt angry at myself for feeling disappointed. It's not like there was any potential, Sadie, I chided myself. He's the god of funerals. He's like 5,000 years old. So, I said, if you can't tell me anything useful, at least help me. We need a feather of truth. He shook his head. You don't know what you're asking. The feather of truth is too dangerous. Giving it to a mortal would be against the rules of Osiris. But Osiris isn't here. I pointed at the empty throne. That's his seat, isn't it? Do you see Osiris? Anubis eyed the throne. He ran his fingers along his gold chain as if it were getting tighter. It's true that I've waited here for ages, keeping my station. I was not imprisoned like the rest. I don't know why, but I did the best I could. When I heard the 5 had been released, I hoped Lord Osiris would return, but he shook his head dejectedly. Why would he neglect his duties? Probably because he's trapped inside my dad. Anubis stared at me. The baboon did not explain this. Well, I can't explain as well as a baboon, but basically my dad wanted to release some gods for reasons I don't quite... Maybe, he thought, I'll just pop down to the British Museum and blow up the Rosetta Stone. And he released Osiris, but he also got Set and the rest of that lot. So Set imprisoned your father while he was hosting Osiris, Anubis said, which means Osiris has also been trapped by my... He stopped himself. By Set. Interesting, I thought. You understand then, I said. You've got to help us. Anubis hesitated, then shook his head. I can't. I'll get in trouble. I just stared at him and laughed. I couldn't help it. He sounded so ridiculous. You'll get in trouble. How old are you? 16? You're a god. It was hard to tell in the dark, but I could swear he blushed. You don't understand. The feather cannot abide the smallest lie. If I gave it to you, and you spoke a single untruth while you carried it, or acted in a way that was not truthful, you would burn to ashes. You're assuming I'm a liar. He blinked. No, I simply... You've never told a lie? What were you about to say just now? About Set. He's your father, I'm guessing. Is that it? Anubis closed his mouth, then opened it again. He looked as if he wanted to get angry, but couldn't quite remember how. Are you always this infuriating? Usually more, I admitted. Why hasn't your family married you off to someone far, far away? He asked as if it were an honest question, and now it was my turn to be flabbergasted. Excuse me, death boy, but I'm 12. Well, almost 13, and a very mature almost 13, but that's not the point. Why, we don't marry off girls in my family. You may know everything about funerals, but apparently you aren't very up to speed on courtship rituals. Anubis looked mystified. Apparently not. Right, wait. What were we talking about? Oh, thought you could distract me, eh? I remember. Set's your father. Yes, tell the truth. Anubis gazed across the graveyard. The sound of the jazz funeral was fading into the streets of the French Quarter. Yes, he said. At least, that's what the legends say. I've never met him. My mother, Nephthys, gave me to Osiris when I was a child. She gave you away? She said she didn't want me to know my father, but in truth I'm not sure she knew what to do with me. I wasn't like my cousin Horus. I wasn't a warrior. I was a different child. He sounded so bitter. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I'd ask for the truth, but usually you don't actually get it, especially from guys. I also knew something about being different, about being the different child, and feeling like my parents had given me away. Maybe your mum was trying to protect you, I said. Your dad being Lord of Evil and all. Maybe, he said half-heartedly. Osiris took me under his wing. He made me the Lord of Funerals, the keeper of the ways of death. It's a good job, but You asked how old I am. The truth is, I don't know. Years don't pass in the land of the dead. I still feel quite young, but the world has got old around me, and Osiris has been gone so long. He's the only family I had. Looking at Anubis in the dim light of the graveyard, I saw a lonely teenage guy. I tried to remind myself that he was a god, thousands of years old, probably able to control vast powers, well beyond magic toilet paper, but I still felt sorry for him. Help us rescue my dad, I said. We'll send Set back to the Duat, and Osiris will be free. We'll all be happy. Anubis shook his head again. I told you. Your scales are broken, I noticed. That's because Osiris isn't here, I'm guessing. What happens to all the souls that come for judgment? I knew I'd hit a nerve. Anubis shifted uncomfortably on the bench. It increases chaos. The souls become confused. Some cannot go to the afterlife. Some manage, but they must find other ways. I try to help, but the Hall of Judgment is also called the Hall of Mart. It is meant to be the centre of order, a stable foundation. Without Osiris, it is falling into disrepair, crumbling. Then what are you waiting for? Give us the feather. Unless you're afraid your dad will ground you. His eyes flashed with irritation. For a moment, I thought he was planning my funeral, but he simply sighed in exasperation. I do a ceremony called the opening of the mouth. It lets the soul of the dead person come forth. For you, Sadie Kane, I would invent a new ceremony, the closing of the mouth. Are you going to give me the feather or not? He opened his hand. There was a burst of light, and a glowing feather floated above his palm, a snowy plume like a writing quill. For Osiris's sake, but I will insist on several conditions. First, only you may handle it. Well, of course, you don't think I'd let Carter. Also, you must listen to my mother, Neptis. Khufu told me you were looking for her. If you manage to find her, listen to her. Easy, I said, though the request did leave me strangely uncomfortable. Why would Anubis ask something like that? And before you go, Anubis continued, you must answer 3 questions for me as you hold the feather of truth, to prove that you are honest. My mouth suddenly felt dry. What sort of questions? Any that I want. And remember, the slightest lie will destroy you. Just give me the feather. As he handed it to me, the feather stopped glowing, but it felt warmer and heavier than a feather should. It's the tail feather from a Bennu, Anubis explained. What you'd call a phoenix. It weighs exactly the same as a human soul. Are you ready? No, I said, which must have been truthful, as I didn't burn up. Does that count as one question? Anubis actually smiled, which was quite dazzling. I suppose it does. You bargain like a Phoenician sea trader, Sadie Kane. Second question, then. Would you give your life for your brother? Yes, I said immediately. I know, it surprised me too, but holding the feather forced me to be truthful. Obviously, it didn't make me any wiser. Anubis nodded, apparently not surprised. Final question. If it means saving the world, are you prepared to lose your father? That's not a fair question. Answer it honestly. How could I answer something like that? It wasn't a simple yes-no. Of course, I knew the right answer. The heroine is supposed to refuse to sacrifice her father. Then she boldly goes off and saves her dad and the world, right? But what if it really was one or the other? The whole world was an awfully large place. Gran and Gramps, Carter, Uncle Amos, Bast, Khufu, Liz, and Emma, everyone I'd ever known. What would my dad say if I chose him instead? If there really was no other way, I said. No other way at all. Come off it. It's a ridiculous question. The feather began to glow. All right, I relented. If I had to, then I suppose I would save the world. Horrible guilt crushed down on me. What kind of daughter was I? I clutched the jet amulet on my necklace, my one remembrance of Dad. I know some of you lot will be thinking, you hardly ever saw your dad. You barely knew him. Why would you care so much? But that didn't make him any less my dad, did it? Or the thought of losing him forever any less horrible? And the thought of failing him, of willingly choosing to let him die, even to save the world. What sort of awful person was I? I could barely meet Anubis's eyes, but when I did, his expression softened. I believe you, Sadie. Oh, really? Holding the feather of truth, and you believe me? Well, thanks. The truth is harsh, Anubis said. Spirits come to the hall of judgment all the time, and they cannot let go of their lies. They deny their faults, their true feelings, their mistakes, right up until Amit devours their souls for eternity. It takes strength and courage to admit the truth. Yeah, I feel so strong and courageous. Thanks. Anubis stood. I should leave you now. You're running out of time. In just over 24 hours, the sun will rise on Set's birthday, and he will complete his pyramid unless you stop him. Perhaps when next we meet. You'll be just as annoying, I guessed. He fixed me with those warm brown eyes. Or perhaps you could bring me up to speed on modern courtship rituals. I sat there stunned until he gave me a glimpse of a smile, just enough to let me know he was teasing. Then he disappeared. Oh, very funny, I yelled. The scales and the throne vanished. The linen bench unravelled and dumped me in the middle of the graveyard. Carter and Khufu appeared next to me, but I just kept yelling at the spot where Anubis had stood, calling him some choice names. What's going on? Carter demanded. Where are we? He's horrible, I growled. Self-important, sarcastic, incredibly hot, insufferable. Ugh, Khufu complained. Yeah, Carter agreed. Did you get the feather or not? I held out my hand, and there it was, a glowing white plume floating above my fingers. I closed my fist, and it disappeared again. Whoa, Carter said. But what about Anubis? How did you... Let's find Bast and get out of here, I interrupted. We've got work to do. And I marched out of the graveyard before he could ask me more questions, because I was in no mood to tell the truth. 29. Zia sets a rendezvous. Yeah, thanks a lot, Sadie. You get to tell the part about the land of the dead. I get to describe Interstate 10 through Texas. Long story short, it took forever and was totally boring, unless your idea of fun is watching cows graze. We left New Orleans about 1 a.m. on December 28th, the day before Set planned to destroy the world. Bast had borrowed an RV, a FEMA left over from Hurricane Katrina. At first, Bast suggested taking a plane, but after I told her about my dream of the magicians on the exploding flight, we agreed planes might not be a good idea. The sky goddess Nut had promised us safe air travel as far as Memphis, but I didn't want to press our luck the closer we got to Set. Set is not our only problem, Bast said. If your vision is correct, the magicians are closing in on us, and not just any magicians, Desjardins himself. And Zia? Sadie put in, just to annoy me. In the end, we decided it was safer to drive, even though it was slower. With luck, we'd make Phoenix just in time to challenge Set. As for the House of Life, all we could do was hope to avoid them while we did our job. Maybe once we dealt with Set, the magicians would decide we were cool. Maybe. I kept thinking about Desjardins, wondering if he really could be a host for Set. A day ago, it had made perfect sense. Desjardins wanted to crush the Kane family. He'd hated our dad, and he hated us. He'd probably been waiting for decades, even centuries, for Iskandar to die, so he could become chief lector. Power, anger, arrogance, ambition, Desjardins had it all. If Set was looking for a soulmate, literally, he couldn't do much better. And if Set could start a war between the gods and magicians by controlling the chief lector, the only winner would be the forces of chaos. Besides, Desjardins was an easy guy to hate. Somebody had sabotaged Amos's house and alerted Set that Amos was coming.